Hey everybody, Marshall here. I was tearing this E4OD down the other day and it made me think of a pretty cool story about doing whatever it takes and a little C6 that could. And a little bit of history about the evolution from the 3-speed direct drive automatics to the overdrive transmissions. And for anybody out there who drag races or does any kind of heavy duty towing or hauling, the reasons behind manually shifting an automatic transmission. So stick around and we'll get to it. Little side note, kind of a motto at the shop where I work. You know, whenever me and my coworkers fix a hard problem or go out of our way to make something happen, at the end of the job, I just look at them and say, whatever it takes. All right, first a little bit of history on the evolution of the transmission. Back in the 70s, everything was 3 speeds. You had your C6s and C4s, the 400s, 727s, 904 Chryslers. But in particular, this E4OD is a derivative of the C6. And if you look here at this case, from the center support back is basically a C6 transmission, and then they just added overdrive. And all of the big three, even the foreign car makers, went to that, and they just all jumped on board and used their old 3-speed transmissions and added an overdrive to the front. So they just overdrove the direct drive of the 3-speed. Which kind of makes sense. I mean, it needed a bigger case and everything, but it is what it is. Kind of smart. You know, they didn't reinvent the wheel. They just made it a little bit rounder so it could go a little faster with a little less engine speed. And all in the name of gas mileage and you know, wear and tear on the engine. Cut it. All right, about the story on the C6. Back in the early 90s, we got this truck in the shop, and it was a heavy-duty Ford truck. Pretty sure it was more than a 350. This truck was insanely heavy. It was probably, in my guesstimate, had to have been between 12 and 15,000 pounds. And it came in the shop, and it was all burned up. And it was the first time I had seen this C6 truck. And after I tore it down, I realized, you know, it had all the stock stuff in it. It was nothing really special about it. So I did all the normal heavy duty stuff. I upgraded the clutches, the old blue plate specials, the Ray Bestis, that was the thing in the day, and put them in it, heavy duty band. And but one thing about it, it actually had a cracked case, so I had to change the case out also. And this is for the drag racers and the heavy haulers out there. One of the reasons for manually shifting a transmission, if you look close at this thing, when these transmissions take off, this is basically bolted to the case. And this is being held by this roller clutch. So all the torque from the engine is putting pressure on this clutch, on this race, and into the case. And all the weight of the vehicle is having to be moved. So that's putting even more pressure on this one-way clutch, which is bolted to the case. So this sprag race is bolted down in the back of the trans, right to the case, just like that. So all the weight of the vehicle is being forced right into that race, which is being distributed into the case. So in the back, you get cracks in C6s and heavy duty units just for that reason. I didn't exactly know why it was back then, because I was just starting to build, probably 3 or 4 years in, just getting my feet wet. But now I know that was the reason for it. So when you put the transmission down in manual first, right now you're in drive position. It's taking off on that roller clutch and putting all the pressure on this sprag, which is distributing the load right into that case right there. But when you put it in manual low, and this is called the low reverse clutch. It goes in the case right around this hub. When you put it in manual low or reverse, it comes on in reverse too. But this clutch comes on and it actually helps hold this piece from turning. And that's the point of just having it in low, or drive, I should say. This sprag race is holding it from turning. When you put it in manual gears, this whole clutch is holding all this. So not only do you have the sprag race holding this drum from turning, but you have the clutch also, which is distributing the load throughout the case all the way through here, instead of it all just being on the very back where this race is bolted to. So that's one of the main reasons when you drag race or you heavy haul, you have to use manual gears. So it distributes the load in the unit, and it's that much more stronger. All right, you could. So I rebuilt the trans, put heavy duty parts in it as far as the clutch packs go and everything. Got everything right and tight, new case, sent it on its way. I would say, I'm gonna say 6 months. Truck came back, all burned up. Not the clutch packs. The clutch packs actually half survived, but the low reverse clutches were burned out of it. And sure enough, the case was bad again. And I didn't know at the time. I was still learning how to build, but had to change out the case, rebuild the trans. I mean, this thing had a shift kit. It was so bad that when you hit the gas, you had to rev this diesel up to about 2,200 RPMs. And having a diesel converter in it, probably a 1,200 stall, that's how much you had to rev this thing up just to get it to move. So it slugged its way through first, slugged its way through second, finally hit third at 35, 40 miles an hour or whatever it was. And you can imagine the pressure on that case just taking off in drive. I mean, it was a big Ford truck, and it had a huge, it was an electrical company, had a huge boom on the back. So like I say, I don't know how much it weighed, but when you drove this thing, it felt like it was 40,000 pounds. But there was nothing you could do other than I suggested either putting an Allison in it, which would have been pretty difficult, or a manual transmission. It never should have had a C6 put in it. But again, it is what it is. So I was determined to get this transmission to survive. So rebuilt it. Wasn't sure exactly what else to do other than put another case in it and send it on its way. And that's what I did.
Cool.
All right, so after, I think I rebuilt this transmission 3 or 4 times before I figured out something better to do, because I was determined to get this transmission to survive, and nothing I did worked. Even put a radiator-sized cooler in the front of the radiator, and when we pull this thing out, the converter would just be blue from overheating, and it was insanity. But I was determined, and I had to think of a better way other than putting better clutch packs and better shift kit and whatever C6 parts I could in this thing to get it to survive. So I had the idea that the E4OD is very similar to a C6 in the back. And if you look at this, the back half is a C6, but there's one difference about it, and the gear train ratio is different. So I kind of thought to myself, maybe that'll work. So let's get rid of this case. And this was back in the early 90s, so as far as I know, they didn't have any kind of gear ratio setups, different gear ratios for C6s. And of course, we were just trying to get stuff done. You know, it is what it is. But I got to thinking, this E4OD build I'm doing here, it actually does have a different gear ratio. And I looked up the gear ratios on a C6 and an E4OD, and a C6 gear ratio in first gear is 246 to 1, and second gear is 146 to 1. And an E4OD gear ratio is 272 to 1, which is lower in first, and 154, which is lower in second. So I said, that might work. Is there any way this can happen? And I got to looking at it. This is the E4OD gear train right here. The back half is a C6, pretty much. Nothing special about that. Rear planet looks the same. C6 stuff, that's all it is. When you get to the sun shell, which I don't have a C6 sun shell here, but it is what it is. The rear is the same, C6, but the front is different. It is not the same size, which in effect gives you your lower first gear and second gear ratios. So I said, man, that's gonna work. I gotta make this happen. The only problem was, all this seemed the same, no problem. Front hub, C6, no big deal. But the sun shell was different. A C6 sun shell is lower here, about cut down about right there, say 1/4 inch. So I do have a C6 direct drum here. This is the E4OD. This is a C6 drum. If you look at the height difference, which there basically isn't any. So that was all the same. But when you put an E4OD sun shell on a C6 direct drum, try to do this. This is kind of just like a press tool now. It sticks way down in the drum. Now an E4OD has a band for engine braking, but it uses clutches here. Uses the clutches for second gear. So this is just an engine braking band. Now, a C6 actually uses a wide band for second gear. So the wide C6 band was basically wrapping up about right there. And that would not work. And I was like, man, what am I gonna do? So I said, you know what? I just took my grinder and I literally cut down what I needed all the way across here. I cut the sun shell down and made it so it just got into the teeth here. That way I can use my C6 band with my E4OD sun shell. And it was working. I was onto it. I was determined to make this work. So I cut that all down, and I think, if I remember correctly, I put a straight edge across this thing on a flat bench and mic'd it, because the biggest problem I was thinking, maybe it was gonna throw it out of balance, me just grinding that off. But I got the best I could. I put this transmission together, and it would probably burn up every 6 to 8 months. And I think I did it 3 to 4 times. I think I even put 3 cases in this thing. And after I put this gear train in the C6, he got about 2 years of drive time before it came back with issues, as opposed to 6 months. Plus, there was a noticeable difference in being able to take off from a stop and get this truck to move to where it needed to go. So that in itself, it's not just about putting high horsepower clutch plates in it and putting shift kits in it. Gear ratios are everything also. It's all relative and it's all so important. And another thing about this is, this goes back to the drag racers and the tow guys. This transmission has clutches for second gear. Get back to the sprag. Where's that sprag at? Where'd the sprag go? All right, back to the drag racers and the heavy haulers. We went through the first gear and you saw why it was so important to manually shift. And this is good for second gear. This is the E4OD drum here, and this is the C6. The E4OD uses this sprag race right here. It's the one-way clutch, and it uses these elements. So all the weight on the vehicle is being transmitted through these little elements. Now, back in the 3-speed days of the 400s and all that, there was only like 8 elements in these things, in 400s. But they figured it out, 4L80s, anytime you need a heavy duty sprag, there'll just be more elements in it. Because all these help distribute your load. Imagine if there was only 6 or 8 of those elements, how little torque capacity that could have. So, when this thing hits second gear, the clutches are splined to the sprag race, and it stops the drum from turning, and all the weight on the vehicle is being transmitted through that sprag. That's an E4OD. On the C6, you have the band. So, the reason for manually shifting is not only do you have the clutches and the sprag holding it in second gear, but you actually get that band coming on. And most transmissions work like this. Low gear, second gear, they all have this ability to do this. So another reason, you got the band and the clutches and the sprag holding it in second in manual, and in automatic second or overdrive second, it's just the clutches. Huge difference. All right, now we got all the manually shifting out of the way. This is part of this E4OD upgrades I'm going to do, and if you look at this planet here, I talked about this one on the teardown. It's aluminum, and it's a 4-pinion. Now, whenever you heavy duty up a transmission, any reputable shop, this is actually a steel planet. If you come and look at this close, this is actually a steel planet, and it's got 6 pinions in it. So effectively 20% more torque capacity. So not only is it stronger as far as the splines go, and being aluminum could bust the whole aluminum case in heavy duty situations, but you get the steel, you get the 6 pinion planets, and this is a C4 here. And actually, look at this here. This is a trans brake C4 I'm building, and I've been waiting for 2.5 months to get a front 6 pinion planet for this thing. It's driving me crazy. The guy wants to go drag racing like yesterday. But this is a C4 front planet. The C6 is a little brother, and it's just a 3 pinion. They literally machine this out, put more pinions in it, and get 6 planet gears in it. So if anybody out there actually can hook me up with a 6 pinion planet, that would be good too. A good one. We're not talking Speedmaster stuff here. And I have a whole nother video on that. We'll get into that later. But I had one of the drag racing C4s. It came in the shop. It came to me, and it had this whole rear drum busted out of it. And the only obvious reason for it was when it busted as soon as they launched the car. And the only reason for it was they didn't have it in manual gears, and it was taken off on the sprag, just like the C6. It works the same way, but this actually has a band come on instead of clutches, but it does the same thing. But the only obvious reason was they were taken off in drive and trying to launch the car, and it just busted that splines out. Instead of breaking the case, it busted the load drum. So, pretty cool stuff. And at this point, if you think I'm not a gearhead enough, you got to check out, I got a personal car. It's a 67 Chevelle, and you got to look at the tag on this thing. Pretty cool. I'll talk about this car more, but right now we got to get the work done. Overdriven. That's a gearhead for you. All right, so that's pretty much my spiel on the little C6 that could. I hope you guys learned something. It's all neat stuff when you're a gearhead. So thanks for watching, and talk to you soon. We're going to be rebuilding this E4OD shortly. I just wanted to shoot this video before I got into the rebuilding of that trans. So thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.